Live. It's hard to tell with YouTube. It says.
I wish it was very clear.
Yes.
Whether or not.
If you're watching and you're a YouTube executive, please fix the going live notification to actually correlate with when you are live.
Yeah.
Because that would make it much easier to do well-timed intros like this. What? Oh no. Welcome to the show for sinners and sufferers, where we have conversations about exploring theology, engaging culture, and watching movies, all for weary souls in need of grace. See, wasn't that cool? It's all like,
yeah,
I mentioned our mission and like put a little bit of a hook. Because if you're like, I like movies, Andor theology, Andor engaging culture, now you're hooked. Now you got to listen.
Speaking of Andor.
Whoa.
What are we talking about today?
Tonight we're talking about Star Wars Andor series. Did Disney make something good? We're talking about internet outrage. Does it reflect reality? How do we live as Christians in an outrage culture? And does it have anything to do with holiness? Then for theology, we're going to talk about God's call for the church. How does Jesus call us, and what does he call us to? As always, my name is Cody.
And my name is Kyle.
And this is the intro. Cool.
Nice.
Hopefully everyone heard that. That's been like the most inconsistent thing.
It's kind of funny because like, yeah, it's sometimes it hasn't been playing the music, but like we're sitting here and we're just like listening to the music, but you can't see anything.
Well, I tried to change it because it was the only thing coming from my computer. Every other sound comes from this soundboard device that's just a little bit out of frame here.
Okay.
But I tried to change it so that instead of sending from the computer to the stream, it doesn't send anything. It sends to this, and then what we hear in our headphones is what's being sent out, so that theoretically everything we hear, you guys hear, so it works. Anyways.
I followed that.
Speaking of confusing technology, Star Wars
can be confusing technology at times.
It's very what would you call it? So in like fantasy writing, a hard magic system means that the magic is very like explained, like the rules of it are very precise. And in Star Wars, it's technically not considered science fiction because the science is never even attempted to be explained.
Except in the prequels.
Yes.
With midichlorians.
Well,
which a lot of people were upset about. So.
Yeah, I was thinking more like hyperspeed and stuff like that.
Yeah,
they kind of like
that's
they don't
true.
Give any explanation.
You can even like run through other ships with hyperspeed now.
Yeah.
So it kind of gets made up along the way, which is fine.
And they tried to explain at some point there's like hyperspeed lanes, so you need to like get to jumping points, but then that hasn't been consistent throughout.
No.
But anyways,
that's not what we're talking
Disney
about.
made a new series called Andor. Have you watched episode 4 came out today?
Oh, no. I haven't seen it.
I watched it just before you came. Mainly just so that when I do this little description, in case, because most people are going to listen to this tomorrow, so they have the chance that they could have watched episode 4 before they listen to us. So just in case it totally changes things, I want it to be in the know. So I might need to rewatch it. Anyways, Disney Plus has made a new series called Andor. It's based in the Star Wars universe, and it follows the adventures of the minor character Cassian Andor, previously seen in the movie Rogue One. The show has so far distanced itself from Jedi and many of the familiar Star Wars characters we are used to seeing in the movies and shows. Rather, it plays more like a science fiction spy thriller / heist series focused on the regular schmoes of the Star Wars universe, the Empire, and the Rebellion.
Yeah, they really took a character I cared nothing about from Rogue One.
Yeah.
And made a pretty good show so far.
I'm really enjoying it.
I did not care whatsoever that this was coming out.
I literally had already canceled my Disney Plus because I've been so disappointed. And then it was like, you have until the 27th to watch shows. So I was like, yeah, I'll watch the first 3 episodes of Andor. I'll watch them. And then today it expired and I wanted to watch the 4th one. So I had to renew my Disney Plus. I feel so cheated. How dare they release quality content when I'm trying to save $12 a month? Which also, I realized was sly because I went to edit my like budget that I keep, and I had it tracking that Disney Plus costs me $9 a month, but I just renewed today and I had to approve it for $12 a month. I was like, I don't remember that happening.
So this is the thing. I know our topic is the show, but when it comes to streaming services, the point of streaming services was at one point to bring access to a bunch of TV shows on demand and basically to kill cable.
Mm-hmm.
Now we find ourselves, as companies do, they have to adjust to the times, and they have, but they've just brought cable back, but more flexible kind of. Like cable still is like $100 a month.
Yeah.
It's insane. And then you get all these channels you don't care about. But now you can get streaming services and everyone is like $10 and you're like, cool, I could spend $10 on that for a little bit. And then they're like, actually, we're raising it to 12, 15. And then now we're back to cable.
And it's very similar too, because like we'll get to Andor, don't worry. But I don't have Netflix right now. But I watched Stranger Things earlier this year because I just upped my Netflix, watched it, and then canceled it as soon as I was done watching Stranger Things. And it's similar. So one of my like favorite TV shows right now is an animated show called Star Trek Lower Decks, and it's like a parody of Star Trek that's actually has the IP. So it doesn't have to like, because there's like Galaxy Quest and other like little parodies of Star Trek, but they actually are just like in the universe, so they can have like named characters show up and stuff, and it's quite good. I enjoy it more than I've enjoyed any of the actual Star Trek shows. But it's in the US only available on Hulu, which I feel like nobody has, and in Canada is only available on Crave, which like almost nobody has. But my previous roommate has it, and because he watches a lot of shows on it. So I've borrowed his login to watch one show because like I don't need a whole Crave subscription just to watch the one show.
Yeah, that kind of becomes the issue. That's the thing with, so getting to Andor here is like what streaming services are doing now is they're releasing shows. I mean, like Stranger Things coming out in June, you're going to want your subscription again, and then everyone gets it again. It's like a draw for them, so they get their customers back and stuff. So Andor potentially could do that. I don't know if it's affecting anything right now. I think
it's been poorly marketed.
It has
like
been.
A lot of people have asked, like, have you watched Andor yet? What do you think? Like, Like, no, it's actually good. But also I've been saying that about Rings of Power, and nobody likes Rings of Power. So maybe I've lost credibility as like a critic.
Movie critic.
But we're critical of things. Like, I still think She-Hulk is super boring.
I still haven't watched it.
I mean, I stopped watching, but I keep seeing clips and spoilers, and I'm like, yeah, good to know it didn't get any less boring.
Yeah.
But yeah, so initial thoughts on Andor.
Good. First 2 episodes, kind of boring.
Mm-hmm.
Third episode, great. One of the best Star Wars show episodes I've seen, actually. Again, people will come at us because we haven't seen Clone Wars unless you have.
I've seen
some of it,
parts of it now.
Yeah, but like
kids,
one of the
I'm sorry.
Live action. I'll just keep it simple. Live action. One of the best episodes I've seen. Has a lot of potential, and I like the fact that it's kind of just set in the Star Wars universe, and they're doing things. And I really don't care about Andor as a character. The first 3 episodes didn't change that for me, even though it probably was trying to.
Yeah.
But cool. It's nice.
I think I like his aesthetic. I think he seems really cool, and I like his jackets and stuff.
Nice jackets.
Like, if I was going to cosplay as a character, if I got into that sort of thing, which for people who don't know is when you dress up as characters from a show, nerds do it.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I'd do Andor because I just have to put on a cool jacket and like trim my beard, and I'm him.
Speaking like a Spanish accent or
that's
something.
fair. That might be problematic. But I guess I agree. The 3rd episode, definitely the best. And I think they worked well together, and it almost should have been packaged as just like a really long premiere pilot. Well, and TV shows used to do that. You'd have a pilot episode that was basically a movie.
Yeah.
Or like Stargate, one of the best sci-fi series of all times, literally started with a movie, which was weirdly bad compared to the rest of the series. It's actually an awful movie. But I think that's something they're running into is I don't know who exactly the writer is, but I feel like they have movie writers trying to write shows. Because like for Mandalorian, that's what worked well, is that it was very episodic, which I've heard a lot of people don't like, but like Boba Fett could have been a movie.
Shouldn't have been a
Obi-Wan
movie,
should have been
though.
a movie.
So boring.
Oh yeah,
Obi-Wan was gonna be one, yeah.
yeah.
Well, that's the thing when they're now that they're putting like Marvel and Star Wars and stuff, and they're getting the big actors to do these shows because it's like the same studio and stuff.
yeah.
It ends up being more like a movie in some sense because you're getting typically you used to have movie actors and TV actors.
Yeah.
Now you still kind of have that, but it's like movie actors are starting to be in shows more
Well,
now.
I mean, you haven't seen the 4th episode yet, so I won't say too much about it. But from watching it, I get the impression, because it's supposed to be 12 episodes, yeah?
Yes.
I get the impression that's going to be like 4 3-episode arcs.
Oh,
Because
okay.
it seemed like it built up to that really climactic moment in episode 3. Then episode 4 felt like the first hour and a half of Ocean's 11, basically. Like that sort of episode where it's like they're talking about what they're gonna do and it's getting you excited, and then it's like roll credits.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine they're gonna stretch it out for the rest of the 9 episodes or 8 episodes or whatever. So I suspect it's gonna be like 4 3-episode arcs,
Oh, cool.
which would actually be smart, I
Yeah.
think.
That'd be fun.
But
Yeah. The one thing that, and this will go right into our next topic, is I haven't seen a lot of like internet rage about Andor.
Yeah.
I haven't seen much about it in general, but people generally like it and are saying that they're pleasantly surprised. And so there's been no like crazy outrage like with things like She-Hulk where everyone's just upset about it.
yeah, it's like every
like
other
that.
show that's come out recently, people just hate
Yeah.
or love and like weirdly vehemently defend. And for like odd points too. Like everyone's trying to make everything about race. I saw the thing today about how like I'm blanking on his name. One of the Stranger Things kids. Anyways, the black one. This is not helping the
Caleb
point.
McLaughlin.
Yeah, well, where he's like, I'm everyone's least favorite because I'm black. And I was like, what?
Huh.
I was like, I don't think so. But then apparently he's actually got a lot of like horrible racist criticism, and it's like, oh,
Yeah.
that sucks.
Yeah, that just seems to happen with all this, like, because you can write anything on the internet and people can hide behind
Yeah,
their username and stuff, so they just go at them.
which we see in our comments quite often.
Sometimes, yeah.
But yeah. Last thought on this before we move into internet outrage. I feel like a strength of Andor is its distance from other Star Wars like characters and tropes, like the Jedi and stuff like that. Because it makes it kind of work as a sci-fi show. Like I really enjoy science fiction shows. There's like The Expanse and other like Stargate and other lesser known ones I've really enjoyed, and it feels similar to me in that it feels like its own universe, and they're able to build up from there. Like,
Yeah.
do you see that as a strength, or do you see that as more of a downside because it should be Star Wars?
Well, people have been saying for the past few years that they need to move away from like Skywalkers and Jedi and move away from that era even, which they haven't, but I don't know, like people are tired of it, but I haven't been tired of it yet. I'm a sucker for when they bring in like Luke Skywalker and he's young again and stuff, and just like connect it that way.
Yeah, the nostalgia.
Yeah, and it's funny because people complain about it, but if like Cal Kestis from the video games comes into this show or something, everyone will be like, "This is amazing. This is exactly what we want." But you can never please people, so I think it's fine. I think it's what they wanted to do.
Yeah,
is like kind of stay away from that stuff, and I think it's benefiting from it for sure.
I honestly think Rogue One has been the best Star Wars movie since the originals. So
Perhaps.
it did a similar thing, whereas all characters you'd never heard of, and there wasn't really Jedi, and the Force played like a very different role. But
yeah, it's true.
anyways, we wanted to talk about internet outrage, and yeah, we each kind of had like different stories we've seen this week.
Yeah.
But like as a general concept, I'll say this, and then you talk about your story that you saw. Is like I had a really stressful kind of weekend in the beginning of this week, and I remember thinking like when I opened Twitter and I follow all these like pastors and Christian teachers and stuff, it's like what I really want and like maybe it's unhealthy, but what I want when I open social media is to feel good. I want to see like a
Okay.
funny joke
Yeah.
or like read a cool quote or be encouraged. And all the Christians are doing, like the big thing is they're all like, "Oh, is Doug Wilson a heretic?" I'm like, "Who?
Yeah.
Why? Do I care?
Yeah.
Does it affect me?" And people are rowdy, or someone apparently tweeted that ADHD is a sin.
What?
Yeah, they're like, it's not real. It's just an excuse for your sin. And then a
Cool.
bunch of people were like, that's dumb. And I'm like, this is all dumb. Like, why engage with that? Like, if if someone comes out there and they're like, I believe elephants can fly, just don't engage with them. Like, but
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting as a Christian, when I looked at Christians on social media, when I looked to that community, that the people who should theoretically have like the better understanding, they're more mature, they have theological understanding, are never like uplifting or encouraging or positive. They're always just like at each other's throats or like outraged by apparently that water that I like that we had, liquid
Yeah.
death, it's demonic.
Oh, why?
Because
it's from the
well,
Alps?
it's just their marketing is very like they're just punk kids basically,
Oh.
and they're just trying to like, they made some joke about how like it's like the water from hell or something. I was like, it's just viral marketing. They're just trying to like upset people.
Yeah.
But then Christians are like, it's literally demonic.
Yeah.
And,
They did that with Monster too. Like Monster, the logo
Oh,
apparently
yeah.
was 666 in Hebrew, not claws cutting something, you know.
Yeah.
But
One, and it weirdly has a tie to one of our other stories. But you tell me, you were saying you saw some outrage.
well, the thing I saw, which I thought was interesting this week, is the whole saga going on right now with the Try Guys, which I knew of them. I don't really follow them very much, but when the story came across my timeline and I saw them, I was like, oh, okay, I know who they are. So just naturally, as algorithms work, it's brought me all the different drama and all this stuff. So basically, the Try Guys are a group of 4 guys on YouTube. They've built a pretty big brand for themselves. The one guy, I guess his whole personality and what they always like make fun of him for and stuff is he's like the family guy, and he's like, he has a wife. He always mentions his wife, and so that's kind of his persona within the Try Guys. His persona is like the wife guy, the family guy. And then it came out over the past week or so, and they announced it, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, that he cheated on his wife
Yeah.
with an employee at their office or whatever.
YouTube channels have offices now.
Yeah, because they're like basically a production company now. So, anyways, that came out, and people were rightfully so, in a way, like completely outraged about this especially because he built his brand on being the like family guy and everything. And Twitter and TikTok and everything has just been going crazy the past few days. People pointing out like signs of it and like how wrong he was in doing this, which we agree. He definitely was wrong in doing this. But all this stuff, and like people are going like, there's this one girl on TikTok that came up on my For You page, and it was like, she was like, look at this picture. Now look at this one. This was on the same day, clearly, and they were together and like are being detectives of all this stuff. And then, so I guess the similar thing is what you brought up as well with Maverick City.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar with like the whole internet.
Well,
Kinda coming in
so
on
the
that.
funny connection is, as I've been like seeing stories about this, they're like, look at the signs, the build up, and like, is Maverick City gone dark? And one of the things is they're like, out at some of their concerts, they sell liquid death sparkling water, and
Really?
we all know that's demonic. So therefore, they're encouraging people to drink demon water, which will get them possessed.
Oh,
And then I saw, well, I didn't watch it, but I saw the thumbnail of Ruslan and some other guy who I've never heard of had a debate about if listening to secular music is welcoming demon possession.
oh,
which
That's
then
weird.
like kind of happened around this drama of I didn't write the dude's name down. I forget
Dante Bo.
it. Dante is
Yeah.
one of the Maverick City worship leader guys. He's like posted videos on social media of him like in a party bus jamming out to Bad Bunny, was it?
Yeah.
Which is, you know, he's like literally the biggest artist in the world.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You know what's funny is how I know that? Because once a year I watch wrestling. I watch the Royal Rumble event, and they always have him there for some reason. And
Oh,
they always
interesting.
mention that he's the largest artist in the world.
Cool.
But I've
Fun fact.
never heard
for
any of his
everyone.
music. But anyways,
Yeah.
he swears in it, I guess. And people were very offended that he was
Dante Bo was listening
yeah,
to
that
it.
he's jamming out to this song. And
Well, it's weird because I saw this, and so I like immediately I'm like, wait, what happened? Because it was just a statement from the group, and they're like, we've decided to part ways with Dante or something
yeah,
like
he's
that.
been like worship leader fired.
Yeah, and so then I was like, oh, I wonder what happened. And then I just went to YouTube and typed in Dante Bo Maverick City,
Mm-hmm.
and it was this random guy, I don't even know who it is, talking about it. And the only thing he brought up was like, look at this story that Dante Bo posted. He's in a party bus,
Yeah.
and they're listening to Bad Bunny. And I was like, is that? And that's all I could find. And apparently
Yeah.
that's the reason too.
Well, officially, no.
Oh,
Officially, they haven't
okay.
given a reason.
I mean, there might be, there might
So-
be other things, and I don't know, but at least the internet outrage for it was like people were
Yeah,
like, "What are you
focused
guys
on-
doing in a party bus?" And like,
When I do think, well, because was it another Maverick City guy who had like posted a video of him like grinding on his wife
Yeah.
for his wedding? Was that the same guy?
no, it's a different guy.
Okay, good. Like, but it's like kind of like their social media usage is very reflective of like secular artists. Like they act like secular
Yeah.
artists on social media. So I can see why people would be like, that's weird. And like, what kind of culture are you engaging in and stuff?
Yeah.
And I think maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I think there is like a line where we can look different. We can be like involved in cultures and look different because like I drink alcohol occasionally. I'm not like a heavy drinker, but I don't have any issue with drinking alcohol. I don't post pictures of myself drinking alcohol
Yeah.
online. I'm not, which is a thing a lot of people do. A
Mhm.
lot of people, like especially like non-Christian people, have photos on social media of them with their favorite drink, and even a lot of Christians I see it were like, "Woo, like double fisting," or like whatever. It was. I don't think that is the persona that I want to put out there,
Mhm.
and I don't want that because even like the thing is the way people view stuff is even if I'm like, yeah, I have like a couple ounces of whiskey twice a month, if I post a picture of myself with a little bit of whiskey, people immediately are like, he's super into whiskey, he's drinking it all the time, he's like a whiskey fiend.
Mhm.
And it's like you just consider how people are perceiving you, and like especially as a leader, which I mean we're kind of not now church leaders
Yeah.
anymore, but like you're supposed to be well respected by all people, like live so that no charge can be brought against you
Mhm.
effectively. And I think that is something that is worth considering. Like if I was an extremely famous worship leader, I'd probably want to
Not
be aware.
do
Like,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that was the thing with the other guy who posted the picture like grinding on his wife and stuff. People were like offended by it, and the way he engaged with it was just weird because I remember he was like, everyone, this is my wife, like it's my wife, come
Yeah.
on, like, and it was just like weird. Instead of being like, as someone who's like put on a pedestal, maybe like not rightfully so. I mean, he's a worship leader. He's a musician.
Mhm.
Okay. But people put him on a pedestal as someone to look up to and someone who has a voice in Christianity. And then to respond like that, like the more mature way, and maybe even you could say the more godly way of responding to that is be like, everyone, I'm sorry that this offended you. I took it down.
Mm-hmm.
And just like do that. I think he eventually did an apology, but like his
Yeah.
initial thing was like, what's wrong with you people? Like, this is my wife. We can do it. We're happy. It's our wedding day or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like showing a level of maturity, which I think we just like throw on Christian artists. We expect them to be mature and expect them to be like theologians and stuff. And it's like,
Well, and we look to celebrities, even in the secular world, for like their political opinions, and like they really drive culture. And I think I've said before, it's funny because like musicians and entertainers used to be like the lowest class.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're a fool or a minstrel, like
Yeah.
whereas now they're like cultural leaders.
Yeah.
And we definitely do a similar thing with Christian leaders and musicians, and especially if they're worship leaders, is we expect them to be like driving Christian culture. And I remember the controversy with Lauren Daigle,
Yeah.
I think it was, where she was like on Ellen, and she was like, "Do you hate the gays?" And she's like, "No."
Yeah,
And she just
yeah.
like didn't have a good, like a well articulated answer. Didn't really say anything, and people were just absolutely attacking her.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, she's not someone who spends her time thinking about that and working out her articulate answer. She's someone who spends her time writing songs and making
And
music.
singing. Yeah.
Yeah. When it's the similar, like, because when I've gone into new churches and they're like, "Can you lead worship?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And they're like, "Oh, lead us a song right now." I'm like, "Oh, I don't have any chord charts." Like, you don't have songs memorized, because it's a different, like, really good worship leaders
Yeah.
are memorizing songs. That's not what I do, so I'm not spending my time memorizing psalms. I'm spending more time working on articulating theology and my response to things and how I engage culture. Like,
Yeah. Well, and it's also like there's a sense in which with the both of these situations, like one's in the kind of Christian realm, the other's in more secular, like worldwide realm with this guy on YouTube and stuff. But like everyone it just cares about what's going on with these celebrities and stuff like that. Unfortunately, what happened with Ned from Try Guys, like what he did, happens a lot. But it's amplified when you have like a public persona, and especially when you market yourself as like loving family guy and everything. But it happens all the time. I think what outrages people in that one. So in my mind, with the whole Dante Bowe thing, I think that's kind of it, at least as far as what we know, with like he played Bad Bunny, he was in a party bus or whatever. Maybe overreacting a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe he shouldn't have posted on social media, but like maybe overreacting Christians there. This guy, Ned, I think everyone is rightfully outraged because they see someone who marketed himself in a way, and people are seeing him kind of as a hypocrite for this.
Yeah.
And they see that as like, that's morally wrong. And everyone agrees like that was morally wrong, what he did. People are outraged. But there's this need for us to like voice our opinions about it. I guess we're kind of doing it right now.
Yeah.
Which is the funny thing. But there's just like this need of being like, to let everyone know I am also outraged at this, and I want everyone to know that I also morally think that this was wrong. And it's like it's just this like, if that happened and it wasn't a celebrity, they would have dealt with it amongst themselves and out of the public eye, but because of who he is,
well,
it's brought into.
I definitely see. So there's this idea of discernment ministries is a big thing online, where it's people who all they do is like take shots at people, like usually other Christians, and just like talk about how awful they are and stuff, and they're all heretics. And they always are like, oh, you know, Paul says to call out false teachers and stuff, but also like I think that's meant for pastors within their congregation. But there's definitely this sort of thought process, it seems, where you see people on social media almost like positioning themselves as being better or holier because they're outraged by the terrible thing.
Yeah.
And
the
it's
terrible public thing.
Yeah. And it's like, are you not outraged by this? If you're not outraged by this, there's something wrong with you. And it's like, I tend to just not get outraged by that much stuff. And I think it's interesting too, something that this isn't really the direction I think we were going to go with it, but just in you comparing this to examples that occurred to me is there's a difference with like Ned's thing wasn't with how he was presenting with himself. It was about what he was doing behind the scenes. Whereas with the Maverick City guy, it was how he was presenting himself. Yeah. Like we don't think the issue was what he did. We don't have an issue with listening to secular music, but he's presenting himself in a way that he doesn't look different from the world. And that's a huge, like you see in the Old Testament, a lot of Israel's laws are about specifically being distinguished from the world. And that's what holy it means, is, well, to be set apart or to be more like God. So when he says, I want you to be a holy nation set apart, he wants them to eat differently, to act differently, to worship differently, to handle their money and their military differently. And I think like the modern equivalent of that would be how we manage social media. And it's just an interesting contrast too, that like the one guy presented himself well, but in secret was doing terrible things, whereas the one guy's doing things that like really aren't that big of a deal, but isn't presenting himself well.
Yeah. Well, and there's also, like, this is a very clear picture of one of the things the world really doesn't like, which is hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it wasn't a Christian leader; it was a celebrity. But as Christians, when we're like upholding God's law and we're trying to live in a way that's honoring to Him, and we say like, this is what it means to be a Christian, and this is why I don't do this, this, and this, and why I do these other things and live this way. And then people look at our lives and they see something completely opposite of that. They're going to be like, what's wrong with these people? Like, that's not, why would I even want to be a part of that? And you see that with Ned, is like, he presented himself as this, and then he was doing something completely different. People have completely turned on him.
Mm-hmm.
And in people's minds, it's like, that's not even like, there's not even a moral gray area there. It's just like, that was wrong.
Yeah.
And we don't like him anymore, and throw him away. And so it's a picture for us as well to be like that, where you're saying like above reproach and being different from the world and actually living it as well in our public and private life.
Yeah. I got 2 questions. The one I'm kind of curious, like how you'll think about this. Wow, I brutally misspelled Christians in the notes there. That's funny. Christian. Anyways, do you think it is right, or that Christians should be offended by these things, by error, by unholiness? Like, do you think offense is a proper response?
There's an element to it where I think Christians should be offended when people are living in a way that is contrary to God and are like blaspheming His name, because we see God as holy and for who He is, and we want to honor Him in that. So when we see people living in a way that's not honoring to Him and blaspheming Him, there is a level of offense we should take for sure. I think what we often do is we pick our things that are like really important to us, maybe even like conscience issues, or just preferences, and that's what we get outraged about. And then we go and watch like shows and movies and stuff that are like blaspheming God's name, taking His name in vain, all over the place, and we're like, that's fine. And I think there's a level of offense we should have for the things that are like blaspheming who God is. But we often are offended by things that are more preference or conscience issues.
I was thinking about this. I feel like it's very easy to fall into sort of the error of the Pharisees. I'm trying to think of a specific gospel example, but like the Pharisees kind of pointing out like, that poor person didn't give very much money. It is almost like, I'm so appalled. How could you? It became for them more about posturing than about legitimately being offended.
There's the one on the Sabbath when I think Jesus heals someone on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And the Pharisees are like, you can't do this. It's the Sabbath. You're not allowed to do that. And he's like, if your cow fell in the ditch, you would go take it out and help it. Yeah. Why wouldn't I help this man and heal him and forgive his sins?
Well, that's a great example, because they really just hated Jesus. Like, I don't think they actually cared that much about people healing on the Sabbath. They just wanted to assert that they're better people than Jesus or somehow holier.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, if we're going to take an application, I guess that's the application for this discussion, is like, if you're being offended by things online, like, search yourself whether you're offended like for the sake of God's name, like you're offended because it's people really like dishonoring Him, or if you're kind of just like feeling the need, or I guess that if you're going to comment, ask yourself, do I need to comment because I think it's helping or correcting, or do I need to comment because I need people to see that I'm better than the thing I'm commenting on or about?
Yeah. I would never do such a thing. This is appalling to me. And it's like, it's things like these where you see celebrities and leaders fall in certain ways and are initial response is, I can't believe they would do such a thing.
Yeah.
But then it's like a sign to us to actually be like, okay, this guy was just caught cheating. How am I going to guard my marriage? Or this guy was caught doing this, and he's been doing this for years. How am I going to guard my heart against this and live in a way that's honoring to God and have that accountability? So
Yeah. Well, my last question is just going to be how should Christians respond and act in an outrage culture? How do we be a light in an internet culture that's just primed to be outraged at everything? Tim Keller says.
yeah, well, there's that verse in James that says, "Be quick to hear and slow to speak," and I think that is one of the best verses that you can take into your online experience. Because a lot of times we'll just look at the headline and be like, that is outrageous. And then you'll read it and it's like, oh, it was actually clickbait and they're not doing anything like that. But also just like not needing the ability to like respond right away, I think is huge. And just kind of like taking a step back for a second and being like, so there's like, I can think of examples. I don't want to give specifics just because, people get mad about certain things. But there is a video trailer released online a few weeks ago. And so I watched it and I was like, what the heck is going on here? What are they saying? And the first thing, I didn't like share it and post and be like, this is outrageous. I can't believe they would say such a thing. I think I sent it to you and asked you about it. I sent it to a couple other friends, like in a small group chat, and I talked to Brittany about it too. And it was just like through that we were able to like talk through it, and now I didn't post on social media about it. Yeah. Amazing! I'm so much better than everyone else, aren't I?
Yep. Well, it's funny because with that exact example too of that video that you said, is my thought is like I could go on Twitter and go on Instagram and be like, this video came out and these people said this thing and it sounds really dumb and I'm appalled. But I'm also thinking, do the people that follow me care? Yeah, is this going to be an encouragement to them? Or is it just like, if I'm just highlighting more false teachers all the time? Like, because I think the only time, like when I was a pastor, that I ever called out like a bad influence or false teacher by name was because I knew multiple people in the congregation were reading this dude's book. So I said, hey, this guy's bad news from the pulpit, and got in hot water for it. But like, there's lots of things, like there's lots of people who I could just go on, like be like, today's episode of Sinners and Sufferers, we're going to talk about how this guy is a progressive heretic and is going to lead you down to the deconstruction lane. But like, rather than that kind of content, I'd rather be putting out positive, uplifting content that's exhorting people towards holiness and good conversations in Christian living, than just like constantly outrage, bashing, and like witch hunting within Christianity. Yeah,
and that's kind of part of this is a good point before we go on to the next part, which kind of connects to all this. But like, part of what we're trying to do is not to be another voice of outrage on the internet, but to kind of just sit here, talk things out, and learn together, and help other people learn about their faith as well. And we're not aiming to get views because of clickbaity titles or anything. Yeah, we talk about relevant topics because they're relevant. We want to look at it in a way that's like honoring to God and to kind of process things as Christians. But, we don't want to post videos with like crazy thumbnails to like just attract people to a conversation because someone like had an affair. And so we're like, come listen to us. This guy had an affair, and then we get more views and subscribers, and become successful. You know how many YouTube thumbnails I saw about, Carl Lentz is apparently pastoring somewhere again. Oh, okay. And it was just like huge thing. I was like, remember you're upset about him, be upset about him again and give me views. And I'm like, this is not productive. Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, it comes down to the like spotting counterfeits by studying the original rather than constantly just looking at counterfeits. Yeah. Is like, if you're constantly raging and being shown how people are wrong, that's not actually helping you know what's true. It's just sort of deflating and discouraging. Yeah, exactly. And I think this transitions perfectly into the next part where like when we act in this like outraged way and we just always go for the current bad things that are happening in the world and just like rage about them, we're being exactly like the world, which God has called us out of the world to live for him. So I think that leads into how Christ called his church.
I would like theology.
I would like
Theology.
I would like to propose
Theology.
We're going to transition into our real theology section. The part that the commenter on last week's video wishes was the only thing we did.
Yeah. The guy hated our
He didn't
our
like movie
quote
trivia.
things.
but-
And we
Well-
just like to have fun. Sorry.
I mean, if you've made it this far into the video and you haven't realized, our mission isn't to be like the next Ligonier or something. Like, we're not scholars.
Could never be RC.
We really just, we wanted to create non-heretical content that we would listen to, basically. But anyways, so we've been using the 1689 London Baptist Confession as a framework of topics to go through, because it makes us have to think less. We've been in chapter 26 for a while. If you want to read along, there's a link in the description. And this week, I actually specifically, like, the link's a little longer because I'm linking to the specific chapter. So you only have to scroll down to paragraph 5. But yeah, we're in our third episode of, I don't know how many it's going to be. We're just going, third episode on the church. And we're specifically talking about how Jesus calls his church, how the church are a chosen people that he's called to himself, and then how we are to live in that. And yeah, I'll just read this first paragraph. 1689, chapter 26, paragraph 5 says, "In the execution of this power wherewith he is so entrusted, the Lord Jesus calls out of the world unto himself through the ministry of his word by his Spirit those that are given unto him by his Father, that they may walk before him in all the ways of obedience, which he prescribes to them in his word. Those thus called he commands to walk together in particular societies or churches for their mutual edification and the due performance of that public worship which he requires of them in the world." And just for context, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, it says, "In the execution of this power wherewith he is so entrusted," it's referring to the idea of Jesus being head of the church. So it's saying, as the head of the church, Jesus calls out of the world unto himself.
Yeah, mainly the main point of this one is to walk before him in all the ways of obedience. So this is what it means when we say the church is to be holy or set apart, is God has called us out of our sinful way of living and brought us to a point where we now seek to live to honor him and to live in a way that's obedient to him. So you don't just like get a card and then you can be like, look, I'm a Christian, and you can keep living however you want. It's like you're actually saved to be transformed to be something else. So
I think it's significant to that, to understand that we are called, that Jesus is building his church. He's calling us to him. It says here through the ministry of the word and by his Spirit. So it's through our evangelism and through the Holy Spirit working in people that people are called to him. And I think that gives significance, because if we're like, I'm just gonna decide to follow Jesus, and then he's like, obey me, then you're kind of like, hold on. I decided to follow you. I didn't decide to obey you. But then when we realize that he's calling us, he's saying, Kyle, I want you to be part of my church. Come join my community, join my kingdom, be part of my people, and walk in obedience. That's a different level of conviction to want to live into that calling that you didn't just decide, but you were called to this. So you were called to make this decision. So I don't know. I find that more inspiring and more convicting to want to actually live into that calling, as opposed to if it was something that like a decision I made on my own.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, I was preparing to look up this passage here, because 1 Peter 2:9-12 actually talks a lot about this, of who we now are in Christ. So I'm going to pull that up here. Because it starts off in verse 9, it says, "You are a chosen race." So that's what you're talking about. How, like, God has chosen us. We believe he has chosen us and to be his church and to save us. That's what Christ accomplished on the cross, was saving his people. You're a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, And so right there he says, this is now who you are. You're chosen, you're a royal priesthood, you're a holy nation, you're supposed to be set apart, so that you proclaim the excellencies of him who called you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's even what we were talking about before, about like being different from the world and even how we interact with people online or just different situations online, is one way in which we can proclaim who God is. We understand why something like adultery is outraged, it causes outrage in people, and that's morally wrong, because God has set the standard that is something that is morally wrong and against his will. But people in the world, they don't have a standard for that, and they're just outraged. But we can actually kind of put some meat on the bones of that and be like, this happens because we live in a fallen world, because we're sinful people and we desire to do sinful things like this. And so the only way that we can actually be cured from this sin that's attacking us constantly and drawing us to do these things that's against God's will and do things that are morally wrong, is by having the Spirit to enable us to kill our sin and live in obedience to God.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, should we read the next paragraph? The next paragraph, paragraph 6, ties so well into this. Do you want to read it?
Sure. The members of these churches are saints by calling, visibly manifesting and evidencing, in and by their profession and walking, their obedience unto the call of Christ, and do willingly consent to walk together according to the appointment of Christ, giving up themselves to the Lord and one to another, by the will of God, in professed subjection to the ordinances of the gospel.
Yeah, and then I was expecting us to go into the 1 Peter 2, 9-12, so I'm glad you read that.
Yes.
And because I think what these paragraphs bring up and what Peter highlights is why we obey. Because the question, whenever you talk about obedience, people are like, legalism, legalism, oh no.
Yeah.
And it becomes legalism when you're obeying out of a fear or out of an attempt to avoid consequence, or
it's my standards instead of God's standards.
Yeah, like out of a sense of obligation. That's what is done away with. That's why we talk about like we're not being under the law, is it's not the basis by which we are judged. We're not under its judgment, under its weight. But what Peter highlights and what the paragraph reaffirmed is that we obey because of our identity, because of who we are, and because of the purpose we've been called to, because we are his chosen people. We are his, here, let me just find the passage and read it. We're his royal priesthood. We're a holy nation. This is cool in Peter too, because he's using terminology that was used to encourage Israel initially as like a literal holy nation. He's saying like, church, you're part of this. Like, this is your identity now too. You are a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people of his own possession. So when we realize who we are, it's like, okay, how do I live into this? How do I live this out? And then also that purpose that he's chosen us as his people to live for his glory, to make his glory known, to share his marvelous light. So that's our conviction to obey, is not out of like, I have to because hell, or I have to because the law, I have to because judgment. It's, okay, how does a child of God, a chosen person, act? And then like, how do I act living into this purpose of making God known? How do I make God known with the way that I live? And I think going back to the social media, are you looking on social media, and how do we look different? How do we look holy? Like, obviously not everything you post is going to be like glorifying to God perfectly.
Like when I post pictures of my coffee on Instagram.
Like,
It's basking in the glory of what he's created, though.
Well, and enjoying creation is a form of form. I hate that wording. Enjoying creation is part of worship. That's a way that we worship. Like it's not wrong. It's not like God put us because what was the early heresy that like hated everything physical?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Gnosticism, isn't it?
Gnostics.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Gnostics are like everything physical is bad. They're like God is like, don't you read Genesis? It says God created everything and they said this is awful. Let me put humans in it. No,
Yeah.
he said it's good. He made it. It's all an outpouring of his character, so it's not wrong to enjoy creation. But yeah, I think thinking about how we're reflecting our identity and our purpose in what we post on social media, and I'll even say like I feel like I could say like that it might be costly because I use the same Instagram account for my music and for just my personal stuff.
Yeah.
So when I release a song sometimes and it does it really well, I'll see like my Instagram numbers count and then I'll be like, here's some blatant outspoken Jesus stuff, and then those follow numbers go down.
They all
And it's-
leave.
Yeah, but then I've also had really cool opportunities with collabs because people reached out and they're like, "Hey, I followed you for music and I saw you're a Christian. We don't want to collab." But I think that is just part of the cost, and I think we need to be willing to pay that cost of being less popular because we are trying to represent God well, to live into our identity and the purpose that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And sticking with the verses in Peter, he gives us examples of what we're supposed to do. Well, he tells us how we're supposed to do this because he says, "Beloved, I urge you as sojourners and exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which wage war against your soul. Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." So a few things that we see there is like one of the reasons that God has saved us and called us to this new calling, it says to wage war against the passions of the flesh, is because it's actually good for us. Because when we say no to our sin and we live in obedience to God, it actually is good for us and good for our soul. Apart from it just being like, it's pleasing to God and that's why we should be doing it, but like it's good for us as well. That's what he's saying there, like the abstain from the passions of the flesh, don't go towards your sin, which wage war against your soul. Like they're killing you every day. Like the reason that we die is because sin came into the world, and us living into that, like it just leads to death. But if we walk in obedience, it leads to life and it leads to God. And so he says, like, keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable. So when they speak against you, they'll actually see your good deeds instead. And so that's the whole, like we were talking about being above reproach with that like worship leader guy. And it's like a moment where he was maybe not wise in what he posted online. But like people who are not Christians could look at that and be like, you're no different than me. And that's what this all gets down to, about like Christians and how are we different from the world, is like when something goes on and people are looking at Christians and how they respond, they should see like a good reaction from like a reaction that is honoring to God instead of the same that everyone else is doing. Because those good deeds and the way in which we're obeying God, actually, the verse says, may lead others to glorify God as well.
Yeah.
And that's why things like when we see Christian leaders fall, in the same way that Ned from the Try Guys falls. We've seen that with tons of Christian leaders, even recently in recent years. That's why it's so like kind of demoralizing, especially as Christians, because we know that that's not the way we're supposed to live, and that's how the world is going to perceive it. And that reflects on God, because we've like named him as who we follow.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the eternal struggle of the Christian life, is living into our convictions, and then I'd say also living in a way that, you know, when they see our good deeds, they glorify God. So like I think of just non-Christian friends, or like in the internet, we talk about internet outrage and witch hunting and stuff. It's a lot of like, this person is a sin. There's a sinner. They're sinning. And I hate them, and I'm going to be super aggressive towards them and belittle them and put them down. And it's like, well, that's not really leading them to look at you and glorify God.
Mm-hmm.
That's leading them to look at you and go like, wow, what a hateful, terrible person that I'm afraid of and want nothing to do with. And there is a way, it is a reality that you can be clear to someone that like you don't affirm their sin, you're firm in your convictions, you take a stance, but then also that person feels loved and valued by you. And I can make that assertion because Jesus did it. Because he was constantly being accused of hanging out with like tax collectors and prostitutes and like the sinners and people like tax collectors. I think we don't have a great context of like, that's like a really lowly viewed job. That's like the memes about how lawyers are awful, or like, like people that were looked down upon or drunkards. It's I think in some counts he's accused of hanging out with. Like, he clearly isn't being like, this is cool, this is fine, just keep doing that. And we see the occasions of him calling people out on their sin and saying, go and sin no longer. But he also is interacting with them in a way where they're not like, wow, this Jesus guy sure is like a hateful bigot.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge, is like we tend to flip flop back and forth between having like zero convictions and just wanting like affirm the world, or like having our convictions but then like belittling the world and like throwing rocks and trying to like distance ourselves by like lowering people rather than distancing ourselves by living holy and living in obedience.
Yeah, and that's kind of closing it off with what we were saying, like how do we live as a holy nation, separate people? One of the ways is actually having one another, and God has given us like the church as a people to call us to holy living as well, like to encourage one another into that. And it's in a mindset of like, I know I'm not perfect and everything, and I've got tons of stuff to work on, but there's something obvious, like so obviously sinful in your life that I need to confront you with it. And you can do it in like a way that is loving and that is good. But really when that happens, and when even things like with both of these situations where they like lose their job and there's, you know, their sin finds them out and there's consequences to it. It is a mercy of God in that, because he's showing you like, number one, there's consequences to your sin, but also this is a call as a Christian, when something like that happens, it's a call to you to live in the way that you're supposed to live, and that this isn't the right way in which you're living. So God's being merciful in that moment and kind of giving you a slap across the face in a sense, and being like, this is not what I saved you to be. I saved you to walk in obedience to me, and I saved you to proclaim to everyone how great I am and in the way that you live. So I think that's one way as Christians that we can look at these sorts of things as well, is to say like, to live in your sin is exactly what Peter says. It's like waging war against your soul. And so when someone comes to you, when a believer comes to you and says, hey, I've seen this pattern in your life and we need to get you out of it, that's actually like the mercy of God, as hard as it may be.
Yeah. Well, and it's cool, these paragraphs, we'll wrap this up quick, but it's cool these paragraphs talk about the individual call to obedience, but in the context of also our call to be part of societies, or to walk together according to the appointment of Christ, giving up themselves to the Lord and to one another. Like, we really weren't meant to do the Christian life alone. And that's something that I think, because in North America, it's a really individualistic society. Like we really want to define ourselves as individuals and to stand out from the crowd. But as Christians, God's intention is that we do it in community. In a community, we're convicting each other and encouraging each other and building one another up. And that is part of obedience, and that's part of how we actually are reflecting God. Is, you know, they'll know you're Christians by how you love one another, right?
Isn't that a song?
It is, but it's also passage. Isn't
Yeah.
it annoying
But I
when
know
a
it as-
really corny song just
I
like
know it as a song.
it's almost like every
kid's
time I
church.
read like the Gospel of John and I make it to John 3:16, I feel like I read John 3:16 in a different voice. It's like my reciting Bible memory verse for a Sunday school voice or something. But yeah, we're not meant to do this alone. Like, you can't be a holy nation as an individual.
That is very true. It's not
Yeah.
a nation if it's one person.
You know, we need the support of each other to build each other up, to encourage and convict each other. And yeah, church can suck because it's full of sinners, but we're all sinners.
Mhm.
I don't know where I'm going with this, but
We're all
But-
in this together.
yeah.
Well,
And
well, I'll wrap this up here because we're going off the rails
Yeah.
now. But it's that's what he's calling us to be as a holy nation as well, is
Mhm.
to keep one another accountable to being that also.
Yeah.
And so like to call one another, that's, you know, the whole point of the church is to gather together so that we can go throughout our week separately and do things that are honoring to God.
I was just gonna say next, speaking of not going through this all alone, we'd love to hear from you.
Hey,
If you we'd love to
what
hear
is it,
your,
this one?
yes. Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment or send us a message on Instagram at Sinner Sufferers. We also have a Discord. You can find the link in the YouTube video description, or you can actually go to our website. If you're not listening to this on YouTube, go to sinnersandsufferers.com, and there's a link there to join the Discord. And we have some actual like communication. Sometimes it'll be quiet, and then suddenly it'll spring to life, and there's conversations. But it's a good time. We want to hear from you. We appreciate you listening. Those of you who are here live, it's funny, you can see the viewer drop off when we start to outro, but those of you who are here live, we appreciate you being here. Hi Jeff, hi Katie and or Brody.
Both probably.
Welcome.
I'm sure.
Both. That's fun watching us as a family. We hope we provided some entertainment and some insight. Yeah, we appreciate everyone listening. If you want to support us, best thing you can do is just share it, drop a like, leave a comment. All those things on YouTube kind of boost visibility, and we get to speak to and with more people and kind of build out this community online that we really love. You can also support us by buying Kyle's coffee from vinecoffeeco.com, which we are drinking today, and
Yes.
it's his new espresso blend, Sunrise. Yeah, released just now, and you can use our code Sinners Drink Coffee to get 15% off of this brand new espresso blend invented by Kyle that is delicious and tastes
delicious.
like a sunrise.
It's like the morning again because I'm drinking it. It's amazing.
It's true. It was really good. This is the third cup I've had today. Anyways, appreciate y'all being